On Saturday night, with a 5-shot lead at the Open Championship, Jean van de Velde told a room full of reporters that he might lose it. He wasn't being modest, and he wasn't being superstitious. He said it plainly. "Better players than me," he said, "have had a commanding lead and lost." And then, when they pushed him on it, he gave them the line that should have been the headline. "What can happen? I can blow it, or I can win. Maybe I'll blow it, but I'm going to enjoy it." He even put a number on the disaster. "Even if I shoot 90 tomorrow," he said, "I'm going to enjoy it." 24 hours later, he was standing barefoot in a Scottish creek with his trousers rolled up to his knees, on the last hole of a major championship he could not possibly lose, losing it. This is the story of the strangest day in the history of professional golf. And I want to be honest with you up front, because most tellings of this are basically just laughing at a man. That's not what this is. Because when you look at what actually happened over those 24 hours and at what the man did afterwards, this stops being a comedy and becomes something a lot more interesting than that. Let's set the table. 1999, Carnoustie, on the east coast of Scotland. The last Open Championship of the 20th century, and by common agreement, one of the most brutal golf courses ever presented for a major championship. The head greenkeeper that year had decided the course needed defending. He narrowed the fairways. He let the rough grow until it was thigh-high. And then the wind came in off the North Sea, and the rain, and what happened next was carnage. In the first round alone, 57 players failed to break 80. 57. These are the best golfers on the planet. 2 of the world's top 10 missed the cut entirely, and the 8 who survived averaged 14 over par for the week. A 19-year-old Sergio Garcia finished his round and cried on his mother's shoulder. They stopped calling it Carnoustie that week. They started calling it Carnoustie. Tiger Woods, who would finish in a tie for 7th, said something before the weekend that turned out to be prophecy. He said that on this golf course, even a 10-shot lead wouldn't be safe. And into all of that walked a 33-year-old Frenchman that almost nobody watching had heard of. Jean van de Velde was ranked outside the top 150 players in the world. He had won exactly one tournament in his professional career, 6 years earlier, in Rome. He hadn't qualified for this Open automatically. He'd come through local qualifying at a course down the road. If he won, he'd be the lowest-ranked major champion since John Daly, and the first Frenchman to win the Open Championship since 1907. And he was playing beautifully. Not spectacularly, just sanely, on a golf course where sanity was worth more than talent. 75, 68, 70. After 3 rounds, he was the only man in the entire field at level par, and he led by 5. Which brings us back to that Saturday evening and the thing he said. "Maybe I'll blow it, but I'm going to enjoy it." There's one more thing you need to understand before Sunday, and it's the piece that almost every version of this story leaves out. Van de Velde's caddy that week was a young Frenchman named Christophe Angiolini. He was in his 3rd year as a professional caddy. He'd only started working for Van de Velde 3 months earlier, in April. Peter Allis, commentating for the BBC, would look at him that Sunday and remark that he only looked about 16 or 17 years old. And years later, Angiolini explained what their plan had been all week. "We had a very aggressive strategy that entire week," he said. "Our strategy was to attack." While everybody else at Carnoustie was hitting long irons off the tee, trying to keep the ball in play, trying to survive, Van de Velde and his young caddy were doing the opposite. They were hitting driver. They were accepting that they'd sometimes end up in that horrible rough because the reward was worth it. Hold on to that, because it's the reason he had a 5-shot lead in the first place, and it's the reason for everything that happened on the last hole. Sunday. It doesn't start well. By the 8th hole, the 5-shot lead is gone entirely, with Craig Perry catching him when the wind dropped. But then Perry makes a 7 from the deep rough at the 12th, and suddenly, Van de Velde is back in front. He birdies the 14th. The lead is 3 again. Meanwhile, a long way down the leaderboard, something else is happening. A Scotsman named Paul Lawrie from Aberdeen had started the final round 10 shots behind. 10. He goes out and shoots a 4 under par 67, which on that course that week was an extraordinary round of golf, and he posts his score in the clubhouse. He finished more than an hour before Van de Velde would reach the last. And then he went to the practice range, in the rain, and hit balls, because there was nothing else to do but wait for a miracle that surely wasn't coming. Van de Velde arrives at the 18th tee with a 3-shot lead. Now, the 18th at Carnoustie is a 499-yard par 4 with a creek called the Barry Burn winding across it, twice. It is one of the hardest closing holes in championship golf. But with a 3-shot lead, none of that matters. He can make a 6, a double bogey. He can take 2 more shots than the hole is worth and still lift the claret jug. On the ABC broadcast, the analyst Bob Rosberg says the only thing that can really get him in trouble here is driving into the burn. And Van de Velde reaches into his bag and pulls out the driver. You have to understand what people watching felt in that moment. He didn't need it, not remotely. He could have hit an iron down the fairway, another iron, a wedge, 2 putts, and won the Open Championship. Alice, on the BBC, says out loud, "What to do, what to do." He's out with the driver. And then, after a pause, "Now I'm not sure this is right." But this was the strategy. Attack. It was what had worked all week. The drive goes right. Badly right. And here's the thing, it gets away with it. The ball clears the burn, lands on dry ground, and finishes over on the 17th fairway. Well away from where he wanted to be, but perfectly playable. Van de Velde said afterwards, "I got away with it. I was on the fairway and I had a terrific angle. So now, second shot. Still doesn't need to do anything clever. Still just needs a 6. He takes a 2-iron and goes for the green." His own explanation of that, years later, is the most revealing thing he's ever said about the whole afternoon. "People say I should have played left," he said, "but the fact of the matter is that I was the one playing the golf in accordance with my DNA." He didn't want to flirt with the burn short of the green. He thought a 2-iron was manageable. He wanted to finish in the bunker at worst, get it up and down, and be champion. The shot leaks right, towards the grandstand full of spectators. And this is where the golfing gods do something genuinely cruel. If that ball flies into the grandstand, he gets a free drop, and he's got a simple pitch to the green, and he wins the Open Championship. There is an eyewitness account from a greenkeeping magazine of that ball passing within about 2 feet of spectators' heads. Instead, it hits a handrail. One piece of metal, roughly the width of a golf ball, in a structure the size of a building. It ricochets off the rail, cannons off the stone wall that lines the burn, and shoots backwards, 30, 40, 50 yards back the way it came, into that thigh-high rough. Van de Velde's own description of it is almost funny. "I hit a piece of metal the size of a golf ball," he said, "and the ball came back." He is now in deep grass, behind the burn, with a shot he never imagined having to play, and he still, at this point, only needs a 6. He goes for the green again. And I understand why people scream about this one, because from that lie, in that grass, the sensible play is sideways into the fairway, wedge on, 2 putts, champion. But he's been attacking for 4 days, and it has worked for 4 days, and there's maybe 15 seconds of thinking happening here, rather than 15 minutes. The ball comes out heavy. It lands in the Barry Burn. If you know one image from this story, it's what happens next. Van de Velde walks down to the water, looks in, and sees his ball sitting there on the sandy bed of the creek with the water running over it. And he starts taking his shoes off, socks off, trousers rolled up, and the leader of the Open Championship climbs down into a Scottish creek in front of a global television audience to see if he can hit it out. Alice, on the BBC, is beside himself. His golfing brain, he says, stopped 10 minutes ago. It's pure madness. And then, almost pleading, "Will somebody kindly go and stop this?" Nobody does. But Van de Velde, standing in the water, does the same thing at last. He can see the tide is coming in and the ball is settling deeper. He climbs out, puts his shoes back on, and takes his penalty drop. Into the deep rough. 5th shot, into the greenside bunker. 6th shot, out of the bunker to a few feet. And then Jean van de Velde stands over a short putt on the 72nd hole of the Open Championship, needing to hole it not to win, but to make a triple bogey 7 and force a playoff. He holes it, which honestly deserves more credit than it ever gets. After everything that had just happened, in front of that crowd, with that in his head, he made the putt he had to make. If you're finding this as compelling as I do, this channel exists for exactly these stories, the ones behind the moments everybody thinks they already know. So consider subscribing before we get to the part that actually matters. The playoff was 4 holes, played over aggregate score, between Van de Velde, Justin Leonard, and Paul Lawrie, the man who'd been 10 shots back that morning and was still warm from the practice range. Justin Leonard later described the whiplash perfectly. In the space of about 25 minutes, he said, he went from being disappointed with how he'd finished to trying to get himself up for a playoff. All 3 of them struggled at first. Lawrie and Leonard bogeyed the 15th and the 16th. Van de Velde dropped 3 shots and fell 1 behind. And then Lawrie, who had nothing to lose and had already played the round of his life, hit 2 magnificent long iron approaches at the 17th and 18th and birdied them both. Paul Lawrie won the Open Championship, having started the final day 10 strokes off the lead, the largest final round comeback in the history of the tournament, and became the first Scotsman to win it in Scotland since 1931. And Jean van de Velde went to the media center. That's the part I want to finish on, because it's the part that changes the story. He could have left. Plenty would have. Instead, he sat down in front of the world's golf press on the worst evening of his professional life and answered every question. He made jokes at his own expense. Next time he said, "I hit a wedge, okay?" And then he said something that tells you everything about the man. He said he'd made plenty of friends because a Scottish man won. His caddy, Christoph, the kid in his 3rd year on the job, got publicly shredded for the whole thing. Commentators and journalists and other players lined up to say the caddy should have stopped him. And Van de Velde's answer, consistently, was that the decisions were his choice, his responsibility, not the caddy's. 20 years later, at the Senior Open, the 2 of them teamed up again, the same player and the same caddy, back at Carnoustie. Because that's the other thing. He kept going back. He plays the Senior Open at the course that ruined him. He does commentary there. He's been asked about that hole, in public, probably 1,000 times, and he answers every time. 25 years on, someone asked him at Carnoustie whether it still haunted him. And he said, "It's never haunted me, and it's not about to start." There's a story golfers love telling about him, that he went back to that 18th hole afterwards and played it with nothing but a putter. The versions vary. Some say the very next day, some say years later. Some say he made par, and some say it took him 3 attempts to make a 6, and I can't tell you which one is true. But the fact that it's the story people choose to tell about him says something. He didn't hide from that hole. He went back and made a joke of it. He never did win a major. He lost a playoff at the French Open a few years later, and he won a tournament in Madeira in 2006, and that was about the size of it. He went back to France and spent years working on youth golf there, growing the game in a country that barely had one. So here's what I keep coming back to. On the Saturday night, this man stood in front of the world's press and said, out loud, that he might blow it and that he'd enjoy the day either way. Nobody believed him. It sounded like something you say. Then he blew it, more completely and more publicly than any golfer in living memory. And it turned out he'd meant every word. He enjoyed the day. He went back for more. He kept the caddy's name clean. He took the joke and told it better than anyone else could. He is remembered as the biggest choke in the history of the sport. I'd argue he's one of the few people who ever genuinely understood what golf is worth. So, what do you think? Was that the greatest collapse the game has ever seen, or the best any of us have ever handled losing? Tell me below. And if you like the stories behind the moments everybody thinks they know, that's what we do here, so stick around.